All right, for number 21, we are going to use a calculator to find 1, 0, and then we're going to factor and find the rest. So, to use a calculator, that just means we're going to type this in to the table feature of our TI-30XS multiview. All right, so we go to the table. So we have x to the 4th power plus x to the 3rd power. Okay, so x to the 4th power plus x to the 3rd power, then minus 29x squared plus x. And then minus 30. Okay, I like to start at negative 10 because it rarely goes past that. Now I'm going to scroll down. I'm looking for zeros on the y side. All right, if I have a 0 at y, the x is going to be an x-intercept, which means it's a 0. So let's see. All right, so there's my first 0 right here at negative 6. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use that 0. So, I'm going to use my 0 of negative 6, and I will use my synthetic division. So I'm going to have 1, 1, negative 29, 1, and negative 30. Okay, so if I bring down the 1, 1 times negative 6 is negative 6. Add these and you get negative 5. Negative 5 times negative 6 is positive 30. That leaves a positive 1. 1 times negative 6 is negative 6. Add these, you get negative 5. Negative 5 times negative 6 is positive 30. And of course, we get 0. Okay? Now, the calculator said to just only use 1 0. I can get away with that because I can use grouping right now. All right, if I wasn't going to use grouping, I could look for another 0. Okay, so there's another 0 at 5. All right, so if I were to ignore the directions, I could use another 0 at 5 this way, and I could keep going like this. Okay, and 1 times 5 is 5, and that's going to make 0. 0 times 5 is 0. That makes 1. 1 times 5 is 5, and I get 0. This gives me a polynomial of x squared, ignore that, plus 1. This cannot be factored. So I'm going to go ahead and write down my zeros and my factors right now. Maybe I'll squeeze it in down here. So look, my zeros, so first my factors. And here will be my zeros, like always. My zeros, I started off with negative 6 and 5, all right? Those two came right off the calculator. That would come from a factor of x plus 6 and a factor of x minus 5. To get the remaining, well, okay, first of all, this doesn't factor. You cannot factor the sum of two squares. It has to be subtraction. If this were subtraction, I would do x plus 1, x minus 1. But x squared plus 1 cannot be factored. Okay, so I'm going to keep it among my factors. Now to find the remaining zeros, I could just set x squared plus 1 equal to 0 and solve. So I wind up subtracting 1 from both sides. That gives me x squared is equal to negative 1. I take the square root of both sides. Don't forget your plus or minus. So x is equal to plus or minus. Now because there's a negative under there, I'm going to have I. I'm tempted to put I square root 1. But I know that the square root of 1 is 1. and I don't need to write down a 1. So I have plus or minus I. So those are my two additional zeros. And I could either write plus or minus I, or I could write these two separately. And I could put I, and then I could put negative I. Okay, so this is the answer. Now, the directions did say to just use the calculator to find 1 0, and then I'm supposed to factor. So the way I could have done it without breaking the rules is I could have used grouping back at this level. And I can see the pattern, 1, -5, 1, -5. So obviously grouping is going to work. So if I put the variables back in right now, I'm going to have x to the third power minus 5x squared plus, and you know, I'm going to keep the 1 there for now, plus 1x and then minus 5. So the way grouping works is we're going to look at these two, and then we'll look at these two together. The GCF here would be x squared, and that's going to leave behind x minus 5. So we really expect to see an x minus 5 over here as well. See that 1 in front? I'm going to go ahead and just put plus 1. All right, because 1 times x minus 5 will just give you x minus 5. Now the x minus 5 is itself a GCF. So I could pull the GCF of x minus 5 out front, and that would leave behind x squared plus 1. All right, and that's the same thing we got the other way. All right, so there's my the 0 of -6 would give me the x plus 6, and then I'd have my x minus 5 and my x squared plus 1, which can't be factored anymore. Of course, the x minus 5 would give me the 5, and just like before, I would set this equal to 0 and solve to get the I and negative I.